What is going on, Energy Strong Nation? It is your host and co-host, David Ramsden Wood and Mike Umbro. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm excellent. How are you doing, DRW?
I am doing great. I'm excited to be back on air with you. Today, we have a special guest coming in later in the show, Brian Daly, who is a senator from California, and you might be surprised to find out he is actually a Republican. There are, in fact, Republicans in California. They're very, very hard to find. But before we get into that, we want to catch up on all the last couple weeks' news. Mike, what have you been watching in the world of energy that is interesting, intriguing, scratch your head-ish, and let's go from there?
You know, the most recent thing that comes to mind is the talk of Biden, now that he cannot get Joe Manchin on board with climate legislation, issuing climate executive orders. And I put a tweet out yesterday. What if the Biden-Newsom administration issues an executive order, banning ICE vehicle sales by 2035, banning hydraulic fracturing by 2026, and phasing out, I forget the third thing, but it was something extreme that I wrote. And, I just feel like it's happening, and California politics are just so nasty and contagious with Democrats that I'm almost fearful of what the administration could cook up, California-esque.
Well, we'll come back to that. The other thing that I was watching this week is as most people saw, President Biden, who was going to end the pariah status of Saudi Arabia as he entered office in 2020, really shunned MBS, shunned the UAE, and delayed his visit with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman until last week. There was a very awkward fist bump. You and I should do like an air fist bump right now on camera for those who are watching. It wasn't a good look, and it is on top of the Nord Stream pipeline out of Russia into Germany has been down for 10 days of maintenance. So those are the things I'm watching. Let's start with what you're talking about, the climate executive order executive. We seem to be ruling everything by emergency order these days. No one actually wants to go to Congress or to the Senate when there's a block. So the House passes these very virtue signaling bills that will never pass. And Joe Manchin seems to be the most powerful man in America. This bill is supposed to be a $300 billion subsidy for specifically the wind, the solar, and the EVs. And I would point people to David Blackman, who's a great writer for Forbes, has an article out on it this morning just talking about, can he do an executive order, an emergency order, and then are we really subsidizing the correct energy sources? Mike, what do you think about these ongoing debates of subsidies and fossil fuel subsidies and what a subsidy is and levelized cost of energy? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, no, we get grouped in on these subsidies somehow as a fossil fuel industry, and we really don't get free money. We don't just get hundreds of billions of dollars thrown into our industry. There are tax code, that we can take advantage of.
Well, would you say take advantage? It is accelerated depreciation. So if I build a building and I have 30 years to depreciate the building, and I spend $10 million, even though the building might last 50 years, I can depreciate it over 30 years, as an example. If I buy furniture for my Airbnb that we were talking about before on air, I believe I can depreciate that furniture over 5 years. In oil and gas, and as an operator and as an owner in non-op working interest myself, we flow through the intangible drilling credits, the IDCs, get flowed through to be able to depreciate off current income, but it means that you don't have any depreciation for that asset base in the future. So it's an accelerated tax benefit that people get with research and development, manufacturing, hard labor, buildings, etc. So to call that a subsidy is crazy. Yet when it comes to wind and solar, these are true, and electric vehicles in particular, these are, if you buy a Tesla, we will give you a tax credit of $12,500 off of the tax you owe. That is definitively and actually a payment for buying that car.
Exactly. And so there's a huge difference. We get lumped into this, and then we go out, going back to Saudi, then we go out and say somehow the American people are foolish enough to think, well, Saudi's producing this in a responsible manner. We should go over there and kiss ass to MBS and ask him for more oil rather than go to Denver, Midland, Bakersfield, our Tulsa, wherever you want to go. Pick a basin in the United States, and it's just so amazing to me that the politicians feel like they're pulling one over or whatever they think they're doing. I don't think even moderate Democrats believe this nonsense. And I'm just, I think it's all going to switch back around here in 2024, but how bad does it get before that happens?
Well, I mean, certainly the midterms are going to stand in, and I think that the Democrats must feel some urgency. The fact that they're trying to say Roe v. Wade is on the ballot, gun control is on the ballot. We're not going to digress into some of those other topics, but certainly there's a lot of panic heading into November. Joe Manchin himself is very interesting because he is moderate. He's from the state of West Virginia. Big coal producing thing. A lot of the Democrats like Bernie Sanders was out this week saying he's sabotaging Biden's climate agenda. But again, like when I think about the filibuster, and this isn't a filibuster issue per se, but if you can't get 60 out of 100 senators to believe that your bill is moderate enough, that it captures enough of the middle, you should not be getting a bill passed. And it's truly remarkable that we've degenerated into this one Joe Manchin, because without him, the bill that 50 Republicans will vote against. So what do you think, just for some fun speculation, if you had a Ron DeSantis, Joe Manchin ticket for president in 2024, is that an unbeatable ticket?
I think so. I haven't thought of that one because I've been thinking in my head, is it going to be Newsom against Manchin in that primary? But that ticket, that would be amazing. I would like that personally.
I would too. And if you go back, Kasich and Hickenlooper, governor of Ohio, Democrat, Republican, governor of Colorado, Democrat, although oil and gas, and he's switched a little bit as a senator to be more progressive to win Colorado votes. But nonetheless, they had talked about a joint moderate ticket. And to me, Manchin would get crushed running in the Democratic primaries because he is so moderate and the primaries are so extreme. But with a DeSantis, and then you bring him on the Republican side, really what you're doing is you're bringing all the moderate Democrats over and saying, we'll have some balance and we'll address these issues. It would be a very interesting ticket. So clearly the next 3 months are going to have a lot of action potentially in Washington with bills coming forward, virtual signaling ahead of the midterms. But we talk about MBS. So Biden goes over, does this awkward fist bump. The reality is, and we've talked about this on the show before, Saudi Arabia produces 10 million out of the world's 100 million barrels a day. Russia produces 10 million out of the world's 100 million barrels a day. And Canada and the United States combined produce around 15, 16 million barrels. That's 36%. And in those jurisdictions, 2 of the 4 are doing everything they can to shut down oil and gas activity, which is totally moving the power structure over to Saudi Arabia, to Russia. What do you think, if you were strategically only, not for national security, not for interest, but strategically only, if you were the Saudis, what would you do? How would you respond to Biden's visit? What would your action be if you were MBS?
I think it'd be kind of what he did. What I took out of that whole thing was, I'll try to get to 13 million. It's just kind of like he's been floating that for a year or more. And basically, could we get to 13 million? Maybe. We might try, but we probably won't do anything. I would do nothing. I would put hay in the barn right now. I would just be making cash, printing money like they're doing, and doing whatever I wanted to do. I really don't see how the United States and Canada, how we have any leverage given what you're stated, that we have this vocal daily campaign saying, oh, the climate is warming and we can't produce.
I mean, so absolutely 100% factually correct. I agree. And B, I think it ties very strongly with the U.S. producer. And so clearly this administration does not want oil, even as they say, well, we need to produce faster, and as they got angry at the retailers of gasoline saying you should lower your prices, because there was a tweet the White House put out, I think earlier this week or over the weekend, that showed that the price of oil had fallen substantially, and therefore why hasn't gasoline prices fallen, even though it's like a WTI future. Gasoline was purchased a few months ago. It got refined, it got trucked, it got purchased. So you're only dealing with high pricing. I mean, it's the lack of economic education is beyond anything. But I wrote a post in January of 2021, and I called it The Great Shrug. I was going to pull it up and read it, but the concept of the Great Shrug was, look, there's surplus capacity from OPEC, and arguably from Russia, and that in 2014, when they didn't like it, they turned the tap up, crushed oil prices. Oil and gas companies in the U.S. went bankrupt. In 2020, just ahead of COVID, March 6th, Russia said, we're not going to comply with OPEC. They said, we're going to keep our production numbers the same, even as world demand looked like it was coming down for coronavirus. And the Saudis said, cool, we're going to 12 million barrels a day. And so they upped it, Russia upped it, and oil, as we saw, fell to negative 37 a barrel only a month and 10 days later. And so to me, the advice is, number one, OPEC spare capacity, for all intents and purposes, needs to go away in order for the U.S. to produce in a reasonably fair market that they're not subject to nation states upping and downing. And number two, that until the consumer, and I said this very definitively, until the consumer is yelling at the politicians over $6, $8, $10 a gallon, until the consumer is saying, I have a fire bowl outside connected to natural gas, and now for me to turn it on for 30 minutes, it's costing me $10. It used to cost me $2. Like, that needs to change. And until everybody feels the pain of climate policy, American producers should not contribute more production. They should manage their balance sheet. They should consolidate. They should get as much inventory as they can. They should grow their international positions. But that is the plan they should do. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that plan is exactly right from a producer standpoint. California, the majors and the big independents out here have effectively been operating like that for 10 plus years because of the craziness that California has on the policy side. So Chevron, Era, which is Shell and Exxon, they operate at $50 a barrel. Their plans do not change no matter what the price is. And I think that, conservative approach is what producers have to do, because these policies are so up and down and so unpredictable. You just have to plan for constant wind at your face. It's constant headwind. Is what it is effectively. And I think I saw the OPEC report say, we as a world are going to demand, was it 2.7 million barrels more next year? So even if they're able to ramp up, demand's going up. So does that even really change the price deck very much? If demand goes up 3 million barrels and they pump another 3 million, what changes there? So I think you do see operators just kind of say, okay, we just got to make money. We have to survive.
Well, and we're seeing out of Europe, which is a great pivot to Europe. I mean, they continue to say conserve, have less hot showers, drive less, heat less, turn your thermostat up. Texas with ERCOT, clearly, relative to nameplate capacity of wind being 35 gigawatts, they were producing in a low wind time too. And obviously, demand is surging during the day. So you have to manage that. We don't have storage. But Europe is feeling a pinch. And going back to July 11th, the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which delivers a substantial amount of Russian gas into the German market, was shut down for 10 days of annual maintenance. Today, as we record this, is July 20th. Tomorrow is the day they're supposed to come back on. I'm curious, if you were a betting man, and obviously we'll be able to test by the time the podcast comes out, but if you were a betting man, do you think that Nord Stream opens on time? And if on time, at capacity it was at before shutdown?
I think on time at a reduced capacity is my guess.
I think that's a great hedge. I don't disagree. I think that it's just enough of a poke and a prod that without them actively sabotaging their pipeline for a ready-made excuse, it probably gets Europe too angry. So I totally agree with you on that. That's a good call. But I've coined this phrase. I'm calling this Putin's 2 weeks to flatten the sanctions. And I truly believe coming out of this on the 21st, as we're in the hottest time in Europe, as manufacturing recession, oil prices are where they're at, that he can apply an incredible amount of pressure for Europe to drop the sanctions as they continue to see natural gas inventories just falling and trickling down headed into October.
And he's just there holding the strings. And I think it's kind of like, I've been thinking, my kids do jujitsu, and on Saturday mornings they get donuts, and they're 5 and 3.5. And it's like, starting on Friday, I'm like, you better be good, otherwise we're not going to go get donuts. And it's kind of like that. I think Putin can just be like, well, I'll give you a little bit here. You better do what I like, otherwise I'll turn it off. And he's just, what are they going to do?
Well, I talked about it in a LinkedIn discussion I was having with a gentleman who disagrees with my position on Russia, and I've basically said, A, the ruble's at 7-year highs, so B, the Russian economy seems like it's doing great. C, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that says that the military equipment we've been giving to Ukraine is very limited in its range. For example, its missiles can only go 75 miles. It doesn't have the capacity to rebuild this without new stuff coming in. The Russian missiles can go 200-300 miles. They're constantly shelling. We're being exposed to Western propaganda around, what is Russia, what is their goal? Are they going to march further? Do they control whatever it is they control? And I've sort of said, look, there's no such thing as a moral good. And if we truly want to talk moral good, let's talk about the Uyghurs in China. Let's talk about energy poverty. Let's talk about access to fossil fuels so billions of people can have any sort of light at night to be able to further their education. If we want to talk about the moral good, there's a lot of topics we should talk about. But until then, we're only talking about competing interests. And the competing interests are Russia in a world that can sanction them and can seize their foreign asset reserves to prevent them from paying down debt. In that world, countries must own resources. And you go back to the Napoleonic era or the era of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini, where the era of the UK, the empire of the British Kingdom was huge because they were in resource capture mode. And so either goods cross borders or soldiers cross borders. Those are your choices. And so to me, this is not a moral question. This is a question of competing interests. And no doubt Putin is playing a much, much stronger strategic game. While we're worried about what is a woman, Putin is going and just pummeling Europe's economy.
Yeah, and it's all ridiculousness. We also saw Saudis buying Russian fuel oil at a discount while we're over there begging for us. It's like they're powering their dirty grid, which is 99% oil and natural gas fired, and they're just powering it at a cheaper rate, and then we're going to go ask them to use that cheap fuel oil to give us oil. It's absurd. And it is that it's power, it's economics, it's gamesmanship, and we're playing social justice warrior over here against ourselves. And when we have the best human rights record in the world, when we allow gay people to get married, and when most people in our age demographic really are down the middle of the road on this, I think. And not to get into the social issues, but I think most people just want government out of everything and want government to support us as entrepreneurs, us in our careers, us developing local resources. We don't want to see the government ask these terrible dictators for energy. We want to make it here. And I feel like that reckoning is coming through, exactly as you're saying, the prices and the pain that Americans are going to feel for the next 12 months plus.
Well, and it's been remarkable to me on that point. And I've made this point often that the U.S. has backfilled growth going back to 2008, when the U.S. was producing 5 million barrels a day. By 2019, November 2019, we produced almost 13 million barrels a day. World demand grew from 92 million barrels a day to 100 over that same 11-year period. The U.S. filled 100% of the growth of the world. And we have depleted tier one inventory. We have limited oil resource. Not that we won't produce for a very long time, but our ability to get to 20 million barrels is limited. And but we are extremely long the natural gas resource here with the Utica, with the Marcellus, with the Haynesville, with associated gas in the Permian, with all the stacked plays. It's been remarkable to me that we have not switched to CNG vehicle concepts. 10 years ago when Encana, Vinziv now, but Encana at the time, that a VP of the natural gas economy who, very similar to Aubrey McClendon, was trying to push the end of coal to create a market for natural gas in 2002, 2003, when we really didn't have that market. And we pushed that, but we've gone away from it because they vilified natural gas so much. And yet Europe has now added natural gas and nuclear to the list of what they're calling green investments, and the Germans have started considering delaying the closure of the last three nuclear plants that were on slate to close at the end of this year. So perhaps we'll see this shift to U.S. consumer vehicles with lithium prices up more than 400%. I mean, EVs are going crazy. The subsidies are going nowhere. And certainly, even if the House stays exactly as it does today and Senate stays exactly as it does today in the midterms, 2022 to 2024, they're not passing a single bill. The number one priority of this administration is going to be inflation and the COVID spike that we will inevitably see this winter. Like there's no choice. And so we're in a very interesting place around CNG should be the fuel that the U.S. transitions to if we want locally sourced gas. And yet, because of Russian sanctions, we're having to export more and more U.S. gas to support Europe while Russia stockpiles natural gas that it can produce for years and years and years when the world becomes short. It's truly short-sighted.
Yeah, I keep scratching my head. Why don't we see the heavy freight haulers and the trucking companies pushing for CNG and push? Because I was just driving through LA yesterday, and you drive through and you see downtown, and in front of that is the massive rail complex where all the shipping containers get moved over from the port. And these are either brought out on heavy rail, which they're doing all sorts of things, trying to do hydrogen, all that. But why is the trucking fleet not going to CNG, kind of the T. Boone Pickens plan? And we talked to Nick DeUlius about it a couple of weeks ago. I'm just so surprised because still it's $7 a gallon for diesel in that area. And now they're probably paying somewhere, south of that with volume breaks. But why aren't we going CNG on the trucks? You eliminate all the diesel particulate matter. The engines are not that much more expensive than the diesel engines. I don't understand. Is it the lobbying that we're lacking as an industry?
I don't know if it's the lobbying. I think about, do you know where the closest CNG gas station is to you?
There's a couple. I don't know. I've looked into it because I've thought about, I'm going to get a big diesel truck with CNG, and no, I won't have to refill for it.
So I think that's part of the issue. As I think the infrastructure around CNG is probably part of the issue. I mean, certainly as you think about the strategy around EVs, a big part of Build Back Better was building charging stations around the U.S. so that you could. There was an interesting post that if you drive between cities, let's say you're going Dallas to Houston, let's say you're going, Denver to, I'm trying to think of a place that's 3 or 4 hours away. Where am I going to go? I guess Santa Fe. You don't see virtually any Teslas on the road long haul. And so part of that is how do we build these superstations? I think that CNG is part of that. I also think that the companies that control the narrative, and by this I mean Facebook, I mean Amazon, I mean Apple, they're so big into the net zero and have been so big into this ESG, inconvenient truth, Al Gore stuff that they haven't been the ones demanding that we move to CNG. So clearly we saw UPS expand their fleet. Oil and gas companies have used CNG from their plants in the past in some of their trucks. But and then I would also expect that because of volume, CNG engines would likely be more expensive than their counterparts. So I'm sure there is an element of it's just more expensive. And at $9 an MCF gas, I would make the argument that CNG is even more expensive without massively investing in the Marcellus and sort of following the EQT plan.
Yeah. So we're on diesel. So at the end of the day, we're on diesel.
So we remain on diesel as we have for over 100 years. Well, in the next 10 days as we head into August, what are you following? What are you watching? What do you think is going to move the energy needle that you think will be an interesting story for our listeners to follow?
Oh gosh, I'm so focused on California right now, trying to get our project going. I'm very interested to see how, like I said, does Biden issue executive orders? I think that's really interesting to me. What do those look like? Do they mirror what's happening in California? Because my theory is we all as an industry, as much as everybody in our industry doesn't want to be a part of California, doesn't want to see anything, it's pervasive. And so my fear is that he's going to issue the same kind of nonsense that we get. And then it's just going to create more uncertainty and regulatory risk for domestic production. And we're going to see more push towards Chinese made batteries and solar panels and wind turbines and the whole deal. It's just, I guess what I'm wondering and what I'm always anticipating is, when is the boomerang? When do we get so far out there and the prices get so bad that everybody says it's got to stop? And so that's kind of what I'm always looking for: daily headlines in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times. And it's interesting. It's just like, when does it stop? I guess is my thought going into August.
Well, it ties for those listeners who've read, and I'm going to acknowledge it is a slog, but it is probably the best book I've ever read, other than in terms of like an eerie omnipresence would be 1984 by George Orwell. But Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. And that was really where the concept of the shrub came from. I think as you talk about how much more pain can people take, we're close to the breaking point where we've seen active pushback. Alex Berenson, for instance, is back on Twitter. We've seen the market fall 10 or 15%. We've seen people actively coming out against ESG. Although there is a bill, I believe it's in the Senate, it might be in the House, that's trying to encourage all fiduciary managers to have to consider the ESG scores of the funds they're funding, even though the ESG companies have proven to underperform the value plays at this point. But that's neither here nor there. And I think you're seeing more and more people shrug some of these virtue signaling, pedantic, AOC. She was at an abortion march, I guess, yesterday, and she conveniently found herself getting escorted away by a police officer. And there's a great video, strongly encourage you to find it. It's on the Daily Wire, where she's just walking with her hands behind her back, making it look as though they've handcuffed her for the photo op. And then she waves to someone, which shows that very clearly she's been like virtue signaling that like she's being dragged away and it'll be part of a campaign video. So I think we're getting to the point where everyone's going to say, F this. And my suspicion is, unless the Russian sanctions are removed in the next 2 weeks, we are going to see nothing but a straight up climb in natural gas and oil prices between now and the midterms. And at some point, we will break in the game of chicken.
I think so. And then keeping with Ayn Rand, the first book I read of hers was The Fountainhead. Yes. And that was I loved that one because it was like the independent, free thinking architect that's kind of like got his own vision of things, and tying into all this as it breaks. My other feeling is it's going to be the independents. It's going to be the smaller companies that innovate out of this and create, George Mitchell was kind of the first to, although my Chevron buddies are like, oh, we were fracking in California before him. But anyway, but you see a lot of innovation out of the independents. So I'm also equally hopeful for what the American independent entrepreneur is going to bring to actually meet the needs of society, not just greenwash everything.
Yeah, to our friends at Chevron, to them I would say I was the first to use the F word in the title of a book. Sadly, I did not publish said book before Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. And so he actually holds the title of the first person to publish a book, despite the fact that I wrote mine 4 years earlier.
Nice.
And agree. Fountainhead, phenomenal book. I read Atlas Shrugged first. It shocked my world. I read Fountainhead second. I've reread both of them recently. Yeah. And I would certainly say that from an independent thought, the Howard Rourke architect character in the Fountainhead, I think is the strongest character. Yeah. And his battle against society and his refusal to conform resonates with myself these days, more so perhaps. But in terms of a societal approach, the Great Shrug is upon us, and we're almost there. Absolutely. So we will get Brian on the show very soon. Apologize for not being able to get him here today. He had a conflict with the schedule. Glad I could catch up with you, Mike. I look forward to our next recording. And until next time, be safe, be good, have a great day, and bye for now.